it's clear that Israel has been violating international law in terms of the treatment of the occupied territory. I think that's been clear for many, many years. The transfer of settlers into the occupied territories, which is, after all, the spark that began this most recent crisis. It was the attempt to take homes from Palestinians in East Jerusalem, is all a part of that. And it's not only a violation of international law, it's a war crime under the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. So this is at the root of it. This is at the beginning of it. It's all Israel's attempts to take more land, more houses from the Palestinians and gradually take over the occupied territory. As for the actual fighting that's going on right now, it's very difficult for an observer thousands of kilometers away to be able to judge whether war crimes are being committed. What we know, of course, is that one way or another, the civilians pay the price for this terrible violence, mainly in Gaza, but also in Israel, because civilians should be immune from armed conflict, and they're not. And it's impossible to have armed conflict in urban areas like Gaza and like the cities of Israel without civilians paying the price. Cooperation from Israel and from its representatives, but informally, of course, Israel did attempt to make appearances before the fact-finding commission. They sent people, again, on an informal and not an official basis. Of course, we were not allowed into the territory, and because Israel has the key, the gateway to the occupied territories and to Gaza, it was impossible for the fact-finding mission in 2014 and early 2015 to actually conduct investigations in person on the ground. But these days you can do an awful lot of interviewing using Skype and FaceTime and so on. So we were not hindered in the way we might have been before we had this technology. I think it's a terrible thing. We watch this, we understand the great frustration that the Palestinians feel. They've been robbed of their homes, they've been robbed of their land, and they are being denied the full right to exercise self-determination. The Western countries continue to invoke the Oslo Accords, which are old and obsolete and not applicable anymore, and yet Palestine doesn't control its territory. Only a few weeks ago, the U.S.-based non-governmental organization Human Rights Watch spoke about an apartheid-like regime, and we remember, those of us, at least people of my age, remember the fighting of the Africans in South Africa or against the white supremacist regime there, born of frustration, a mismatch in terms of the arms and everything. Ultimately, it was unsustainable, and Israel should know that what it's doing and what it has right now is unsustainable. We either have to have a one-state solution in Israel, but one where the Palestinians are given equal rights and are treated equally, where the apartheid-type regime ends, or a two-state solution where Palestinians are given full self-determination. One way or another, this is not sustainable, but it's extremely painful for people outside Israel and Palestine to watch this, and our heart breaks for the suffering of the Palestinians, both in the occupied territories in East Jerusalem, but above all in Gaza. Most of the countries, the European Union, many of the other Western powers have insisted that the Fourth Geneva Convention applies to the occupied territories. A few of them, I should say more than a few of them, have quietly tried to undermine the efforts of the International Criminal Court to address the war crimes, particularly the war crime of transferring settlers into an occupied territory. You know, it's again, the analogy with South Africa is hard to resist. In South Africa, the Western countries, by and large, gave their support to the apartheid regime for many years, and then gradually that began to weaken, and we have to hope that will weaken too. Of course, Israel has a powerful military, an unbeatable military in many respects in that area. And but the isolation is what it needs. And unfortunately, last year, just about a year ago, the Israeli regime was greatly encouraged by Trump's shift in the American position. We're all waiting anxiously to see whether Biden is going to roll back from that, because that position has changed in several respects, and it was a terrible encouragement to the Israeli regime, a terrible blow to the Palestinians. Palestinians have also been deserted by some of the Gulf states who were traditional supporters, and this too has weakened them. So this is a desirable change, and hopefully, I mean, what has to happen is that Israel has to reach that understanding that the apartheid regime in South Africa did in 1990, is that they can't go on like this, and this has to change, and it has to be a dramatic political change. If I can, I just want to go back on one other point. You mentioned that Israel, the Prime Minister, has accused the International Criminal Court of being anti-Semitic. This is just a slander. This is totally unfair, and there's no basis for saying it. All that the International Criminal Court is doing is exercising its jurisdiction, and its jurisdiction includes the territory of Palestine. But the International Criminal Court is conducting investigations in many parts of the world. There's no basis for any accusation of anti-Semitism. It's a vile slander.